This is William Still's Underground Railroad in Alexandria walking tour. Today, we're going to explore a number of different stories in Alexandria's history. One story is going to include a fugitive runaway from one of the more predominant historic boarding schools in our city, two stepbrothers that run away on the Underground Railroad, a slight connection to one of the more famous Underground Railroad conductors in Harriet Tubman, and our last story is going to include a couple who run away to freedom to avoid being split apart. Our first story is about the escape of a man named Oscar Payne. He would have been an enslaved individual here in the city of Alexandria, and we know that he would have lived in a house that's over my shoulder. The house is no longer there, but back in the 1800s, he would have been in this house, owned to a woman named Miss Mary Dade. Miss Mary Dade did rent him out, and she rented him out to a man named J.P. McGuire. J.P. McGuire would be the head of a local boarding school, now known as Episcopal High School, that existed back in the 1800s as well. And we know from Oscar's story that during his time at Episcopal High School, he's not allowed to learn how to read or write or take advantage of the academic opportunities. We also know that in 1858, Oscar is able to escape Episcopal High School. And so when he does escape in 1858, he makes his way all the way up north to Philadelphia and interacts with William Still, the noted abolitionist. William Still copies and writes down his story and experience here in Alexandria, and then he continues on his journey. One of the things that we also know about his story is that J.P. McGuire decides to try to track him down. And the way he does that is by putting out a slave advertisement. This advertisement here is a copy of the advertisement that J.P. McGuire would have submitted to local papers and looking for Oscar Payne. Luckily, he never finds him, and we now have this story to tell you. So one of the biggest questions I usually have on this tour is about Harriet Tubman. People ask me, did Harriet ever travel to Alexandria? Unfortunately, we don't believe she did. But we do have a story that's closely tied to the area in Maryland where she did a lot of her work, Dorchester County. The story of a man named Joseph Vinny, or Joe Vinny, was an enslaved man here in the city, and his wife and kids were enslaved in Dorchester County. During his enslavement, he would routinely visit them, but in 1857, he escapes from Alexandria, goes to Dorchester County, and actually participates in a much larger escape of about 28 enslaved people. They escape out of Dorchester County, Joseph, his wife, his kids, and they head all the way up to Philadelphia. So the memorable 28, as William Still puts it, is one of the larger slave escapes from that area. Our next story involves two brothers, Oscar and Joseph Ball. They're two enslaved men here in Alexandria that live in this neighborhood. They're owned by a woman named Mary Elizabeth Gordon. And Miss Gordon owns a number of slaves, but Oscar is the oldest of those enslaved by her. When he is in his 20s, he tries to negotiate his freedom with her. Once those negotiations fail, he looks for other ways to escape. And luckily for him, he connects with the Underground Railroad. And in 1857, he escapes from Alexandria. He also brings with him one of his housemates, and those two gentlemen join a caravan of others as they head north. The group that heads north stops in Philadelphia, meets and interacts with William Still, and then continues on their journey to upstate New York. They end up staying in Oswego, New York for about 6 months, and then a majority of the group goes to Canada. But Oscar Ball stays in Oswego because he wants to reconnect with his brother. His brother Joseph is still here in Alexandria, and Oscar works and writes letters to conductors hoping to get his brother out of bondage. The challenge for his brother is that his brother has a wife and 4 kids. And if his brother is to escape, what does he do about them? Unfortunately, the next year, his brother Joseph escaped from Alexandria, leaving behind the wife and the kids. Joseph luckily makes it all the way up to Oswego to reunite with his brother, but as you can probably imagine, guilt follows him. And when he gets there, he is not necessarily satisfied with the fact that he's escaped but left his wife and kids. And so he writes a letter to William Still asking if there anything that can be done by the Underground Railroad to save his wife and kids from bondage. We don't have all the details, but what we do know is about 3 years later, the wife and the kids are reconnected with Joseph, and they all live in Oswego. And so, one of our best stories here in Alexandria about the Underground Railroad ends happily. Off to the last site. This last site is about George and Jane Graham. They're two enslaved individuals here in Alexandria, and they're a couple, and they love each other. Both of them are owned by a woman named Jane Beverly, but Miss Beverly has threatened to separate them, and they can't have that. And so instead they make the choice to escape, not knowing what their future is going to be, but knowing that they want a future together. And so they end up escaping on the Underground Railroad, making their way to Philadelphia, where they see and talk to William Still. After that, they make their way up north, into Syracuse actually. And then in 1861, they make their way all the way up north into Canada and settle down in the Collingwood neighborhood, where they actually get to know and meet other former runaways as well. And so again, we have one of our more known stories here in Alexandria that does have a happy ending, with a number of enslaved people finding freedom by using the Underground Railroad. Thank you for walking with us today. Again, I'm John Chapman with Manumission Tour Company, and I hope to see you here in Alexandria taking one of our tours. You can find us on the web or on social media at manumissiontourcompany.com.